I probably got interested in marine mammals once I arrived in grad school. Wasn't I was interested in them, but they weren't something I was passionate about until I got to grad school and got into manatee research, working under Dan Odell. I think one of the themes that's governed my life professionally and personally is I'd rather be lucky than good, and I kind of went to grad school at University of Miami to study reef fish behavior. That's what I was really interested in at the time. And the fellow I wanted to work with was coming off his fourth heart attack, wasn't taking grad students. So I wound up with this young fellow who had just arrived from UCLA, Dan Odell, still good friends today, and started studying manatees with Dan back in 1974.
Wow.
So I grew up interested in biology, was a zoology and chemistry major, and the sciences were always kind of my thing, but also thought a lot about getting ultimately into academia and teaching. So at different times in my life I've done all those things.
Mm-hmm. So when you were a kid growing up, where'd you grow up and how did you get interested in animals and nature?
Yeah, I grew up outside of Baltimore at a time when the area west of Baltimore was all farmlands, and my home was surrounded by cattle farms and streams, and I'd go down and catch catfish and brim and spend time chasing or being chased by the cows, and just grew up outdoors a lot with a lot of caught snakes and frogs and just kid stuff outside.
Right. And so you started working on manatees at an interesting time, and that was right at the time, just immediately after the passage of the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act, and right before the protections for manatees got really underway in Florida. So you were right there at the beginning of all this with Dan.
The very first meeting of the Marine Mammal Commission occurred my first fall at Rasmus in 1974. The act was passed in '72, and Twist came on board and started organizing things, he and Vic Sheffer and some others. And like I say, the very first meeting, I had no idea what the MMPA was or what it was about. Ultimately, I wound up chairing the agency for a third of its life at present. I chaired it for about 20 years.
Wow.
And under 4 presidents. So it became very much a part of my professional world. But you're right, it was just getting underway. And even though manatee protections had been in place since the 1890s, I think that the passage of the MMPA, I think at least as much as the Endangered Species Act, really, manatees are so visible. They're very much an urban marine mammal that I think that they kind of became a poster child for a lot of the conservation activities that emerged.
Now you mentioned the Marine Mammal Commission and your involvement with it. Can you tell the audience a little bit about what your role was in chairing that commission?
Well, the Marine Mammal Commission was created under Title II of the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1972. The first commissioner, the first chairman of the commission was Vic Sheffer, just a remarkable guy who I was lucky enough to get to know, who just died a couple years ago at 104.
Wow.
Amazing fellow. But the commission it's an independent federal agency with oversight for all marine mammal activities in the U.S., and designed to take a lead in certain international activities as well. So I was asked to be on the Committee of Scientific Advisors for the Commission in the late 80s when I was like 30 years old. And in 1991, President Bush asked me to chair the entire agency. So there's 3 commissioners, there's a staff in D.C., and then there's the Committee of Scientific Advisors. So basically as chair, the chairman and the 2 other commissioners typically serve as kind of a board for the staff, and read all the letters that go out, read all the permit applications, weigh in, particularly on commission policy on a particular issue as it comes up. So as I say, George Bush Sr. appointed me, and then Clinton and George W. Bush and Obama for up until 2010 kept me on with that.
Right. Now, you've had involvement with lots of marine mammal issues other than manatees, obviously, with your role, not just your role in the commission, but your research and your field work with dolphins right here in the bay and everything. Can you kind of give us your perspective, personal perspective, on how manatees and the sirenians fit into sort of the marine mammal spectrum for you?
Mm-hmm. As I say, manatees, because they're so visible to people and because they've become so politicized, I think they're a poster child for a lot of marine mammal stuff around the world. I think the Florida manatee, oddly enough, is arguably one of the two best studied species of marine mammal in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's a subspecies, but one of the best studied taxa of marine mammals in the world. A huge amount of effort, money, energy from a variety of groups has contributed to a remarkable long-term database. What's interesting is, what's interesting or depressing or frustrating is that there's still these major gaps in our knowledge. And as I'll mention later when we talk more about conservation, the conduct of science does not automate the conservation process.
Right.
Conservation and science are really different, and I think it's something that young people should be aware of. It's one of the, when I was growing up, I was kind of raised on the idea if you did some good, solid ecological studies, it would have influenced conservation. Well, not necessarily so. You can have species, you can have abundant information and have no political will to conserve, or you can have no information and have great political will to conserve.
Mm-hmm.
It's best when conservation is informed by good science, but again, the two are often out of step.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's been somewhat the case with manatees at certain times. I think thanks to the perseverance of some of the NGOs and some of the scientists, a variety of groups have ensured that regulations and protections are in place sufficient that the manatee population at present and in the recent past has been increasing. That's great news.
Right.
But we're living in a rapidly changing environment, a rapidly changing human environment, and protection isn't assured. We still need to remain vigilant, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And these lessons that we're learning for this well-studied species probably apply in spades to most other species in the world. Certainly, among the sirenians, the other group that we know a lot about, the other taxon, is dugongs in Australia. Thanks to Helene Marsh and many of her grad students and George Heinsohn and others, we know a lot about Australian dugongs. But again, the future isn't assured for them, even though there are a lot of dugongs in that particular country.
So, you've mentioned that you've worked at kind of on both sides of that fence between the basic science, if we can call it that, the basic fundamental biology of, say, manatees, and then the kind of policy decisions that are made that affect the population status and therefore the conservation of the habitat as well as the creature itself.
And I'd add the third leg of that stool.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
The two certain legs are having as much information as possible and developing the legal system, the marine protected areas, the top-down approach. But then the third leg that has been lacking in so many cases is the bottom-up approach of community involvement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you look at dugongs, they're found in 37 countries. I mean, just an incredible distribution. Manatees found in a couple dozen countries.
Mm-hmm.
And the level of legal, the paper protection may be there, but the top-down actual protection isn't. Unless you start to groom the communities to be interested in the sustainability of these species and of the environments that support them.
Mm-hmm.
It's you're still probably fighting a losing battle, even with lots of science and lots of laws. The father of modern biology is Charles Darwin, and the way that we think about our world and our place in that world changed dramatically because of what Darwin did. And Darwin's not a real snappy writer. You read the Voyage of the Beagle, and even for somebody in the field, it can get a little tedious at times. But one of the things that I used to ask my students to read, all right, I didn't ask, I told them they needed to read, was Charles Darwin's autobiography. And again, it's a little dry here and there, but the last couple pages are worth the wait, because what he says in the last couple pages is, I've been asked by a lot of learned people how I was able to influence the thinking of so many people with what I did, and what personal attributes I have that have allowed me to be as successful as I've been. And I can imagine, before I tell you his answer, I can imagine Newton being asked that question, and the answer I would expect Newton to make would be, I'm brilliant. I sit under an apple tree, I get bopped on the head by an apple, and I invent calculus. 200 years later, I can't figure out calculus. But Darwin's answer was, well, I love what I do. I love what I do. I really work hard. I have a lot of common sense. And I reflect long and carefully over everything that I do. And I used to tell my students, any one of you, based on that evaluation, can be Darwin-esque. You may not be quite as successful, but can you be patient? Can you be, oh, and the other one was creativity, being creative. Can you be creative? Can you stimulate that in yourself or promote that? Can you work hard? That's a choice. Picking something you love, that's up to you. So anybody can aspire to being like Darwin. Ultimately, conservation is a value. The way you treat other people, the way you treat the natural environment, that all has to do with personal values and what's important to you to do and leave behind. And I've mentioned to you that I think I'm a poster child for the saying, I'd rather be lucky than good. I've had some amazing opportunities and had them at a young age. When Bush asked me to become chairman of the commission, I was, I think, 36 years old. I mean, just looking back, incredibly green, incredibly young. Have no idea to this day why I was tapped. But one of those things where, as intimidating as that situation was for me, I could never be more grateful that came about, because it caused me to shift my perspective into a way where I could use my science to more actively promote conservation. And ultimately what I found out about myself is I still get tickled by my little bits of science. I think that's fun, and I publish a paper on this and that. But what I found is that the driver for me is making a difference in terms of the quality and sustainability of the natural world and of wildlife. So again, I've been able to taste both and find out where my relative strengths and interests lie.
Good. Now, in any career such as the one you've had, there are bound to be unexpected challenges as well as unexpected rewards when you stick with it the way you've done. And can you think of any things like that come to mind that might be of interest to the audience?
Sure. I'll start with the rewards. I think that the best reward for me has been the opportunity to travel all over the world and to meet people all over the world and get to know them and talk about what makes them tick. And to personally see that even though there's jerks all over the world, there are a lot of really terrific, wonderful, giving, caring people. And I probably lived a total of close to a year and a half of my life up on the North Slope of Alaska in Eskimo villages, and was honored that some of the Alaskan native elders gave me my own Eskimo name. And when I first went up there, very hands-on, very, very at a distance. We have no reason to trust you, buddy. We're going to get to know you. And over time, I've developed some great friendships up there, and great friendships in parts of the Caribbean and elsewhere. And like I say, that's the benefit of seeing that there's great people all over the world working to leave the world a little bit better place. It was really refreshing and energizing.
It must be energizing to feel that's a support system essentially for you.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. the great challenge, I think, is also human. You know, when you study animals kind of do what they do, and you can study them, and it's fun, it's predictable. It's a challenge, don't get me wrong, but it's the human side that's often the bigger challenge, because you started out by saying, by asking me what my values are, and how my values with my profession compare with my personal values. What you find is that, okay, so people all buy into, you know, don't murder, don't do this, don't do, but when it comes down to some of the day-to-day choices they're making about how they interact with their environment and with other people, some very, very different value systems out there. And to learn about those value systems, to respect people's right to have different values, but then to try and work with people who may be as stubborn as I am, to shift their values so that they're more compatible with what I egotistically think are the more appropriate values. That's a challenge. The human side is really can often be the really, really tough, frustrating part of all this. They say it may be frustrating to lose a tag on a manatee or this and that, but the science is less frustrating in general than trying to shift values, human values, in accord with what you think ultimately the world will benefit from.
Right. Now, that must play out often in the political realm, because one of the things that conflicts often with the kind of values that you're talking about is economic, incentives. So a person that makes a livelihood in a way that might conflict with maximum conservation of, say, manatee resources, you can sort of understand where they're coming from, and yet at the same time, like you said, it might be deep in your heart that you want to shift that value so there's a way to coexist.
Right.
And it's not. Sometimes there are no easy answers.
There aren't. The Pew Foundation recently did a survey of the U.S. public, and the question was, what are the top 25 issues that you wish the government would address for you? And rank order those 25. And conservation, I believe, came out number 21. And global climate change came out number 25. Generally, especially now with funding the way it is, the federal government has difficulty, legitimate difficulty, dealing meaningfully with more than the top 2 or 3 of those issues.
Sure.
So it's healthcare, it's the economy and jobs, important stuff. Not unimportant at all. But as long as conservation ranks 21 out of 25 of our top priorities, it's not going to be done meaningfully. And I think that for our long-term mental health, for our long-term economic health, for our long-term lots of things, conservation needs to take a more prominent position. And I don't think we've sold, if you will, marketed the idea of why conservation should be a higher priority very well. The main thing that I would say is that I perceive a lot of young people who get discouraged by the enormity of certain challenges. And for conservation, the challenges are enormous. I mean, you're often going up against major industry, huge resources being invested in ways that contradict the sorts of goals that you would have for a particular species or ecosystem. And how do you make your mark? What do you do? So many young people just get discouraged and say it's too big a fight. I can't do it. And I hope you won't get that way. I think that giving up on what your passion is because it's a big fight, I guess the stubborn side of me doesn't find that acceptable. And recently I was privileged to work on a book with Helene Marsh and Tom O'Shea, and the last chapter of it is my favorite chapter. And it's called not Conservation Challenges, it's called Conservation Opportunities, because what it talks about is, in the face of these enormous issues, what have some people done? Are there templates available that can show you how to make an impact productively for conservation? The answer is absolutely yes. So look at that, and or similar sorts of things, rather than getting discouraged and giving up. I think that the young people today face bigger problems because my generation has created bigger problems, but they're also intellectually more. I think the idea of interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary big picture thinking is probably more prevalent today than it was when I was growing up. So the challenge may be a little bigger, but your tools are a little better than what I had. And go with your passion, work your butt off. Don't give up, and I think you can succeed.